During the 200 days of the Israeli aggression on the Gaza Strip, the occupation destroyed most of the infrastructure, equipment, and most of the health, educational, and administrative institutions. Its raids and incursions until April 22, 2024 resulted in 34,183 martyrs and 77,143 wounded, most of whom were children and women. The following are the most prominent stations recorded in the Israeli aggression on Gaza from October 7, 2023 to April 22, 2024, October 2023. Operation Flood of Al-Aqsa. At dawn on October 7, the Palestinian resistance launched an unprecedented attack on the Gaza Strip settlements, calling it Operation Al-Aqsa Flood. The attack began with the firing of thousands of rockets at Israel, and about 1,000 elite fighters from the Qassam brigades, the military wing of the Islamic resistance movement, Hamas, infiltrated the settlements by land, sea and air, seized military sites and captured hundreds of Israelis, including dozens of officers and soldiers. Operation Iron Swords. On the same day, Israel began its aggression on the Gaza Strip, which it called Iron Swords. On the first day of the aggression, more than 300 Palestinians were martyred and more than 2,000 were injured. State of war in Israel. On October 8, Israel's Security Cabinet approved Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's decision to declare a state of war against Gaza under Article 40 of the Basic Law, Government. This means placing Israel, its population and civilian facilities under emergency law, assigning the IDF Home Front Command to act according to the requirements of war, calling up reserve soldiers and imposing restrictions on publication in the media. On the same day, the United States of America announced the dispatch of 2 aircraft carriers to the Middle East to support Israel and prevent the expansion of the war, and European and Western countries announced their support for Israel. On October 10, the leader of the Houthi group in Yemen, Abdul Malik al-Houthi, said that the group is prepared to participate in the war against Israel if the United States intervenes directly militarily. On October 31, the group announced the launch of a large batch of ballistic and cruise missiles and a large number of drones at various targets in Israel. The military spokesman for the Houthi group, Yahya Sari, said in a press statement that this operation is the third operation in support of our oppressed brothers in Palestine. On November 7, 2023, the group announced again that it had launched a batch of drones at what it described as sensitive targets inside Israel. Power outage in Gaza. On October 11, the Gaza Strip was completely cut off from electricity due to the fuel shortage and the power plant stopping working. On the same day, the Ministry of Health in Gaza announced that the number of martyrs had reached 1,055 and the number of injured had reached 5,184, confirming that 60% of the victims were children and women. Israel's dead. An official tally on October 11 put the number of Israeli dead in Operation Flood at 1,200, including hundreds of soldiers and officers. The Israeli Ministry of Health reported that more than 3,000 Israelis were injured, including 28 in critical condition and 345 in serious condition. In the same context, the Israeli army announced that about 500,000 Israelis have been displaced from their areas since the start of Operation Flood of Al-Aqsa. On October 30, the number of Israeli dead since the Palestinian resistance launched Operation Flood of Al-Aqsa rose to more than 1,538 dead. Israeli army spokesman Daniel Hagari said the number of soldiers killed since the start of the war on Gaza had reached 311, and on November 3 he announced that the death toll had risen to 338 soldiers and officers. Killing of Israeli prisoners. On October 13, the Al-Qassam brigades announced the death of 13 prisoners in its possession, including foreigners, as a result of the intensive bombing carried out by the occupation forces on the Gaza Strip. On October 26, Qassam Brigade's spokesman Abu Obaida said that about 50 prisoners held by it had been killed as a result of the ongoing Israeli raids. On the 16th of the same month, Abu Obaida announced that the resistance had between 200 and 250 prisoners, and he confirmed that there was no way to retrieve them except through negotiation and a swap deal. On November 5, the Qassam Brigade said that the Israeli bombing of the Gaza Strip had resulted in the loss of more than 60 prisoners. White phosphorus and hunger. On October 15, Amnesty International confirmed that Israel used white phosphorus in Gaza, and the World Food Programme confirmed that there is not enough food in the Strip. Security Council and United Nations. On October 17, the UN Security Council failed to adopt a draft resolution for a ceasefire in Gaza. On the 27th of the same month, the United Nations General Assembly adopted a resolution submitted by the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan on behalf of the Arab group calling for a humanitarian truce in Gaza, after the Security Council failed to reach consensus on the crisis. 120 UN-member states voted in favor of the resolution, 14 voted against it, and 45 abstained. Baptist Hospital Massacre. On the same day, the Ministry of Health in Gaza announced that the occupation had committed a massacre in the courtyard of the Baptist Hospital in Gaza, killing about 500 martyrs, most of whom were women and children. The health ministry spokesman said they could not meet the needs and that the massacre is huge, stressing that there was no safe place in the Strip from the indiscriminate Israeli bombardment. Israeli plans to displace Gaza residents. On October 25, the Israeli Ministry of Intelligence recommended a plan to evacuate the residents of Gaza to the Sinai Peninsula after the end of the war. A leaked document from the ministry revealed that the plan includes 3 stages: establishing tent cities in Sinai, southwest of the Strip, establishing a humanitarian corridor to help the population, and building cities in the North Sinai region. Former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett had earlier put forward a 10-point plan to blockade Gaza and end Hamas. Bennett suggested that the Israeli army not penetrate deep into the Gaza Strip, but rather impose a complete siege on the northern Gaza Strip and create a buffer zone on the border to stifle the resistance and force it to surrender. Bennett also proposed dividing the Strip into 2 regions, a northern and a southern one, defining a demilitarized zone, using starvation as a weapon, and preventing the entry of fuel and food into Gaza. Targeting Wael al-Dado's family. On October 25, several members of the family of Al Jazeera correspondent in Gaza, Wael al-Dado, including his wife, son and daughter, were killed in an Israeli bombardment that targeted a house they had fled to in the Nusrat camp in the central Gaza Strip. For his part, al-Dado said that there were more than 100 people in the targeted building, including a large number of members of the al-Dado and Awad families. The Dado family members fled to the Nusrat camp in the southern Gaza Strip after he decided that he would not be able to devote himself to them amid the continuous bombing and his tireless work covering the aggression. Cut off communications to the sector. On October 27, the government media office in Gaza announced that communications and the internet had been cut off in the Strip, while Israel confirmed the expansion of its ground operations, amidst heavy and unprecedented bombardment, the most violent since the beginning of the aggression. The death toll from the Israeli aggression at the end of October 2023 rose to 8,306 martyrs, including 3,457 children and 2,136 women, in addition to more than 21,000 wounded, according to the Ministry of Health in Gaza. November 2023. Speech of the leader of the Lebanese Hezbollah. On November 3, 2023, the Secretary General of the Lebanese Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, said that the Battle of the Flood of Al-Aqsa is 100% Palestinian, but it has become extended to more than one front and more than one arena, stressing that his party has been involved in it from the beginning and is continuing to fight it. He said, "We entered the battle on October 8, noting that what is happening on the Lebanese front is unprecedented in the history of the Israeli entity, and what is happening on the Israeli border will not be enough in any case." UN agency heads angry. On November 6, the heads of 18 UN organizations and agencies called in a rare joint statement on the situation in Gaza for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, expressing outrage at the number of civilian casualties in the Strip, which at the time had reached about 10,000, about half of them children. For nearly a month, the world has watched the situation in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory with shock and horror at the growing number of lives lost, the heads of UN agencies wrote in a statement on the UN Interagency Standing Committee website. In Gaza, an entire people is under siege and attack, denied access to the essentials of survival, and people are being bombed in their homes, shelters, hospitals and places of worship. This is unacceptable, the agency officials said in a statement. Scary human figures and statistics. On November 7, the government media office in the Gaza Strip announced that 70% of the Strip's population had been forcibly displaced from their homes. The office said in a press release entitled, "Frightening Humanitarian Figures and Statistics," that 70% of the population of the Gaza Strip, 2.2 million people, have been forcibly displaced from their homes due to the intensive Israeli bombing and raids. He stressed that the Gaza Strip was bombed with 1,000 tons of explosives, at an average of 82 tons per square kilometer, and that about 2% of the total population of the Gaza Strip became direct victims of this aggression, either martyrs or wounded. The statement added that one person is injured every minute, one is martyred every 4 minutes, one is a child martyr every 10 minutes, and one is a female martyr every 12 minutes. In turn, the Euro-Mediterranean Human Rights Monitor stated earlier that the per capita share of explosives due to the ongoing Israeli attacks on the Gaza Strip exceeds 10 kilograms. Complex. On November 14, Israeli occupation forces stormed Al-Shifa Medical Complex and turned it into a military barracks after besieging it for several days and clashing with Palestinian fighters in its vicinity. On November 23, Israeli forces arrested the director of Al-Shifa Hospital, Dr. Mohammed Abu Salmiya, and a number of medical teams. Then, on November 24, the Israeli army withdrew from the Al-Shifa complex, 10 days after storming it, destroying parts of it, and carrying out bombing operations in some of its sections and buildings. Hospitals out of service. On October 24, the medical staff at the Indonesian hospital in the Gaza Strip announced that the electricity had been completely cut off to the hospital, meaning that it was out of service. On October 24, the Ministry of Health in the Gaza Strip announced the total collapse of the health system in all hospitals in the Strip, while the World Health Organization and the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees, UNRWA, called for the rapid delivery of fuel and medical supplies to Gaza. On November 24, the Director General of the Palestinian Ministry of Health, Munir al-Barish, reported that the Israeli army had stormed the Indonesian hospital, and that the storming had been preceded by several days of Israeli shelling and siege. After more than 70 days since the start of the aggression, most of the hospitals in the Gaza Strip have gone out of service due to the bombing and deliberate destruction by the occupation and the cessation of ambulance services, in addition to the destruction of schools and infrastructure throughout the Gaza Strip and the targeting of civilian homes, which resulted in the displacement of 85% of Gazans, according to UNRWA. The occupation forces raised the tents of the displaced in the yard of Kamal Adwan Hospital before withdrawing from it, and buried dozens of displaced people, patients and wounded people alive inside and around the hospital. Lawsuit against Israel at the International Court of Justice. South Africa on November 10 called for an investigation into Israeli leaders for war crimes and genocide in the Gaza Strip. South Africa's foreign ministry has summoned the Israeli ambassador to protest what it described as his unfortunate behavior linked to the war on Gaza. In early November, Pretoria recalled all its diplomats from Israel and called on the United Nations to deploy a rapid force to protect civilians in Gaza. On December 29, 2023, South Africa formally filed a lawsuit against Israel at the International Court of Justice in The Hague, supporting it with 84 pages of evidence condemning Israel for seeking to commit genocide against the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, and demanding temporary protection for the Palestinians. On 26 January 2024, the court issued its ruling approving a series of temporary measures and procedures to prevent genocide in the Gaza Strip, calling on Israel to implement them immediately. The court demanded that Israel submit a report within a month on all temporary measures imposed, and take immediate measures to improve the humanitarian situation and prevent destruction in the Strip. Temporary humanitarian truce. With Qatari and Egyptian mediation, Hamas and Israel agreed to a 4-day truce that began on November 24, 2023 and was extended for 2 additional days. About 200 Palestinian prisoners were released in exchange for 50 Israeli civilian prisoners, and humanitarian aid convoys were allowed to enter the Strip. Operations killed Israeli soldiers, destroyed hundreds of military vehicles, and bombed Ashkelon, Tel Aviv, Darrow, and the Ra'im base with a barrage of rockets in response to the Israeli massacres against civilians, while the occupation announced an increase in the number of its dead, including officers and military officials. Israeli forces launched their first major ground offensive in southern Gaza on the outskirts of Khan Yunis and also in areas in the central Gaza Strip following a campaign of airstrikes that has caused hundreds of thousands of people to flee. Guterres uses Article 99. In accordance with Article 99 of the UN Charter, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres sent an unprecedented message to the Security Council regarding the Israeli war on the Gaza Strip, warning of its dangers worldwide. He also warned that the public order in the sector is on the verge of complete collapse, and this is the first time Guterres has used this article since taking office in 2017. Colleague A. Naz al-Sharif. The Israeli army targeted the home of Al Jazeera journalist Anas al-Sharif in Jabalia, killing his father. Colleague al-Sharif revealed that he had received threats from Israeli officers to stop his coverage of the Israeli war on the Gaza Strip before the targeting, and he confirmed at the time that he would not respond to these threats and would continue his journalistic coverage as usual. Martyrdom of Al Jazeera photographer Samer Abu Daqqa. Al Jazeera cameraman Samer Abu Daqqa was martyred in Gaza on the 70th day of the aggression on the Strip, and his colleague Wael al-Dado was injured while covering the shelling that targeted Farhana School in Khan Yunis, south of the Strip, on Friday morning. 120 mass graves. The Euro-Mediterranean Human Rights Monitor announced the documentation of more than 120 random mass graves in the governorates of the Gaza Strip to bury the martyrs of the Israeli aggression. According to the observatory, people in the sector have resorted to creating random mass graves in residential neighborhoods, courtyards, roads, wedding halls, and sports fields, in light of the difficulty of accessing the main and regular cemeteries. Al Jazeera monitored the bodies of Palestinian martyrs decomposing in the streets of Beit Hanun, north of the Gaza Strip, where the residents were unable to bury them due to the intensity of the Israeli bombardment and the inability of ambulances and civil defense vehicles to reach them. Before that, testimonies were received about other bodies left in the streets and dogs eating parts of them distance of 400 meters from the Beit Hanun, Erez, crossing to the north. Under the title, "You Arrived Late," the Al-Qassam brigades commented on the discovery of the giant tunnel in the northern Gaza Strip, and explained that it was used in Operation Flood of Al-Aqsa, and that its discovery by the enemy is of no value. The number of martyrs reached about 22,349, including 21,822 in Gaza, until the end of December. Among the martyrs in Gaza were 9,000 children, 6,450 female martyrs, 312 medical personnel, 40 civil defense personnel, 106 journalists, and 136 United Nations employees. January 2024, assassination of al-Aruri. Salah al-Aruri, deputy head of Hamas's political bureau, was assassinated on January 2, 2024, along with two other Qassam Brigades leaders, in an Israeli drone attack that targeted a building housing the movement's office in Beirut. And his colleague, journalists Mustafa Thureya and Hamza al-Dado, son of colleague Wael al-Dado, were martyred. And journalist Hazem Rajab was injured in an Israeli bombardment near Rafah in the southern Gaza Strip. Journalist Ali Abu Ajwa was also martyred in a bombardment on Gaza City, bringing the number of journalists martyred that day since the beginning of the war to 110, according to the government media office. Qatari mediation. The Qatari Ministry of Foreign Affairs announced the success of its mediation in reaching an agreement between Hamas and Israel with the aim of bringing in medicines and humanitarian aid to civilians in the Gaza Strip in exchange for delivering the medicines needed by the Israeli detainees held by the resistance on January 16, 2024. 1,000 military vehicles in 100 days. The spokesman for the Izz ad-Din al-Qassam brigades, Abu Obaida, gave a recorded speech for the first time since November 23, 2023. Abu Obaida confirmed that al-Qassam targeted and damaged 1,000 Israeli military vehicles during the 100 days of the Israeli war on the Gaza Strip. Israel's losses in 100 days. The number of Israeli army dead has risen to 523 officers and soldiers in the Gaza Strip since October 7, 2023, while the Palestinian resistance says that the number of Israeli army dead is much higher than the announced number. An Israeli medical association reported 100,000 requests for psychological assistance in Israel during the war. Channel 12 Israel said that 11,000 rockets have been fired at Israel since the start of the war on Gaza on October 7, 2023. 1,000 targets and 2,000 arrests in 100 days. The Israeli military announced that it had bombed 30,000 targets in the Gaza Strip and 3,400 in Lebanon since the beginning of the war until the 100th day, and said that it had arrested 2,300 Palestinians from the Gaza Strip, some of whom it claimed had participated in the October 7 attack. Number of martyrs in 100 days. The number of victims since the beginning of the war until the 100th day has risen to 23,843 martyrs and 60,317 wounded. The Government Information Office in Gaza said that it had recorded 1,825 Israeli massacres, and 28,822 martyrs and missing persons, including 9,100 children, during 86 days of Israeli aggression on the Strip, while the number of displaced persons reached 1.8 million people. Blowing up the buildings of Al-Izra University. On January 18, 2024, the occupation forces blew up the Al-Izra University building in the south of Gaza City. Those forces had camped there for 70 days and used it as a military base and detention center, before leaving it, booby-trapping it, and then blowing it up. The bombing targeted the first and only university hospital in the Gaza Strip, and the second in Palestine, the postgraduate studies building, the undergraduate college buildings, the medical and engineering laboratory buildings, the nursing laboratories, the media training studio, the courtroom of the Faculty of Law, and the graduation halls, after the contents of the buildings were looted. The occupation forces also blew up the National Museum established by the university, which contains more than 3,000 rare artifacts that were looted by the occupation soldiers before blowing up the building. Events of October 7. On January 21, 2024, Hamas published a long official document explaining the events of the Al-Aqsa flood and its account of the surprise attack launched by the Al-Qassam brigades and the resistance on the settlements surrounding Gaza. The document was titled, "This is Our Story. Why the Al-Aqsa Flood?" explaining that the battle did not start at the present time with the occupation, but rather it is old, dating back to the British Mandate and after the Israeli occupation. The document indicated that the flood was a necessary step to confront the Israeli plans being hatched against the Palestinian cause, Al-Aqsa Mosque and the holy sites, and to end the siege of the Gaza Strip. The document denied Israeli reports accusing the resistance of targeting civilians, stressing that the attack only targeted military sites, and that avoiding targeting children, women and the elderly is a religious and moral obligation on which the movement's members are raised. The statement called for continuing popular pressures at the Arab, Islamic and international levels to end the occupation, activate movements to reject normalization and continue boycotting Israeli goods, companies and institutions that support the occupation. The ambush of the Maghazi. On January 23, 2024, the Izz ad-Din al-Qassam brigades carried out what it called a complex operation targeting the occupation forces that had penetrated east of the al-Maghazi camp in the central Gaza Strip. According to scenes broadcast by the battalions, the operation began by targeting a house where an engineering force was entrenched, which led to the explosion of the ammunition in their possession, followed by targeting a Merkava tank with an anti-tank Al-Yassin 105 shell. The tank was securing the house where the engineering force was entrenched, and then detonating a minefield with an Israeli force that was in the same place. This complex operation, or what was later called the Maghazi ambush, resulted in the killing of 21 Israeli soldiers, whose deaths were announced by the occupation, and this day was described as the most difficult for the Israeli army since the beginning of the ground invasion of the Gaza Strip on October 27, 2023. Storming Khan Yunis. On February 5, the occupation forces continued their incursion into the city of Khan Yunis amidst heavy gunfire, artillery shelling, and airstrikes. They also continued to blow up citizens' homes in various parts of the east and west of Khan Yunis. On February 11, the Palestinian Red Crescent announced that the Israeli occupation forces had stormed Al-Amal Hospital in Khan Yunis, and that they had stolen all the keys to the ambulances and administrative vehicles and disabled all the vehicles to prevent the staff from operating them in light of the siege that the Israeli army has imposed on the hospital for more than 20 days. On February 13, the Israeli occupation forces surrounded Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis, demolished its wall, shelled its surroundings, asked the displaced people inside to evacuate it, and turned it into a military barracks after storming it on February 15. On February 25, the occupation announced the end of the military operation in Nasser Hospital, more than 10 days after storming it and turning it into a military barracks. Targeting Al Jazeera